From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The 2024 Republican presidential nominating convention continues in Milwaukee and moves into its third day Wednesday, and the party is in an optimistic, even a buoyant mood here in Milwaukee. The Republican Party is united in a way that I haven't seen in many conventions, and that was reflected in speeches by Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, former Donald Trump opponents, on day two, Tuesday of the convention. There's some grumbling behind the scenes about some elements of the Republican coalition, about VP nominee J.D. Vance, but nothing out in the open. And we'll tell you about all of that. Meanwhile, Democrats, again, behind the scenes, are revving up their effort to try to push Joe Biden from being their candidate one more time. Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch, our daily opinion Wall Street Journal podcast. And we're here in Milwaukee, as we have been all week, with my colleagues Kim Strassel. Hello, Kim.
Hi, Paul.
See, I get to look at her face to face here. And Kyle Peterson. It's Kyle Peterson as well. How are you, Kyle?
Happy Wednesday, Paul.
Happy Wednesday indeed. All right, let's talk about the state of the party and what we're learning from this convention about the GOP mood. I was out on the floor of the convention yesterday, as you were, Kyle, in the evening session. And I have to say, it's a Trump crowd, big time Trump crowd. Unlike 2016, where you had a lot of anxiety, a lot of saying, oh boy, we're not going to win this. And 2020, of course, was the COVID year, so there wasn't really a convention. But this time, they're all in for Donald J. Trump. Let's listen to two of his primary opponents, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, talking about their endorsements of Donald Trump.
You don't have to agree with Trump 100% of the time to vote for him. Take it from me. I haven't always agreed with President Trump. But we agree more often than we disagree. We agree on keeping America strong. We agree on keeping America safe. And we agree that Democrats have moved so far to the left that they're putting our freedoms in danger.
I am alarmed that the current president of the United States lacks the capability to discharge the duties of his office. Our enemies do not confine their designs to between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. We need a commander-in-chief who can lead 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. America cannot afford 4 more years of a weekend at Bernie's presidency.
Well, Kim, how do you read the Nikki Haley and DeSantis speeches? All the way, by the way, Vivek Ramaswamy also spoke Tuesday.
By the way, too, I just want to echo you. I have never seen such ebullience at a convention before. The closest I think I ever saw something like it was maybe 2004 when George W. Bush was being renominated. And that's what the feel is here. It's almost like a renomination, Paul. Because often, you know, at times you've got a new candidate. People are becoming familiar with them. You don't really have that. But this is a guy everyone's comfortable with. But there's something additional, and maybe it's because Trump's been under such an onslaught, a media attack. There's just there's an extraordinary amount of enthusiasm. Those speeches were fascinating, very different styles. Ron DeSantis, as you just heard there, really focused a lot of his speech on attacking Joe Biden. He was the pit bull, as it were. Not as much about Donald Trump. He was very well received by the audience, which is interesting to me because, you know, as you said, there were some other contenders up on the stage, and there didn't seem to be a lasting unhappiness with the audience that anyone had challenged the nominee. A little more tepid of a response for Nikki Haley, which might be because she stayed in longer. And she was more interesting because she didn't entirely back away from her former criticism of Donald Trump, you heard there, but rather she came up with a justification. It's okay. You don't have to agree all the time. By the way, I think most voters feel that way. In America, you don't have to agree with Donald Trump all the time to vote for him. But you also had Vivek Ramaswamy Ramaswamy. You had some people up on the stage that were in the running to be Donald Trump's Veep nomination. Even though they didn't get it, they were up there. That included Marco Rubio. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was up there last night, too, the governor of Arkansas. So I think that gives you a flavor of how broadly the coalition has come together in support of him. And last night was a help for probably some of those out there in the nation who still have some reservations, but seeing, for instance, a Nikki Haley up there saying you got to go do it, that might be really important in the end.
Well, politically, that was a big chunk of voters in many states, Kyle, who even after Nikki Haley had formally dropped out of the race, continued to vote for her. Republican primary voters. And basically what she did, not that they're taking orders from her, but she is sending a signal. You have to vote for Trump because the situation with the country is in dire straits and you need to change commander-in-chief. Now, her coming aboard to give the speech was last minute, and the Trump campaign finally did offer her an invitation. She did not get serious consideration for vice president. I think, unfortunately, I think that would have really helped Trump broaden his coalition. But her speech was, I thought, a good one and might help at the margin with some voters.
I agree with Kim that it was a little bit of a tepid reception in the audience, but I think important for Trump to reach out to those voters, and Haley perhaps returned some of the tepidness. So one of her lines was, "We agree more often than we disagree," which is not exactly a ringing endorsement. She also said this: "I want to tell you a few things about the commander-in-chief I know and worked with. As ambassador to the United Nations, I had a front row seat to his national security policies. We sure could use those again." So it is more an argument that the alternative is worse and that President Trump would pursue policies that Haley agrees with, even if he is not her favorite president or her favorite commander-in-chief, which I thought was a bit of a fascinating dynamic. But realistically, if Nikki Haley wants to have a future in the Republican Party, I think this is what she needed to do. She needed to come here and make amends and make an endorsement, and maybe she will make a play for 2028. It's always possible. It's hard to predict what the next 4 years will look like, but there is definitely disagreement within the Republican Party about whether J.D. Vance is a real successor to Donald Trump. If that's what Trump intends, he may end up with a challenge from Nikki Haley.
Well, and maybe some others. But I also would say that just in terms of raw political talent, being able to speak and galvanize a crowd, Haley is just so much better than Ron DeSantis on a podium. There's a lightness to her ability, a charisma that you need, that spark as a politician, whereas Ron DeSantis is really a grinder.
It was one of his problems during the campaign, honestly. Yeah. I think it was several months before he learned to smile.
And Vivek Ramaswamy also spoke. I thought he gave a very good speech. It was one of his best. It was the optimistic Vivek, not the let's pull out of all the world and attack everybody right, left, and center as sellouts and treasonous Vivek Ramaswamy. But he's got some talent. If he could channel it and discipline it, I suspect he might be a 2028 candidate as well. He really does want to get the job as a senator from Ohio now. That's going to open up if J.D. Vance becomes vice president.
He's got a lot of support out there, too. I think, by the way, whereas Haley appeals to a lot of moderate suburban voters, there's a youth contingency that really gravitated to Vivek.
That's true. Yeah, I've noticed that myself. The other thing that happened on Tuesday in the speech of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who worked in the White House with Trump, and then Laura Trump, who's head of the RNC, his daughter-in-law, they tried to sand the rough edges off of the perception of Trump as a bully, as somebody who doesn't get along with people, the one who clashes with everybody, sends mean tweets 5 times a day, all of that, which he has had relatively under control in recent weeks. But they tried to say, here's the Donald Trump we know. And he's not the ogre you think he is, that some people accuse him of being. He is a good boss, a good father-in-law, and the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah Huckabee Sanders told some really amazing stories about her time on the podium in the White House and the abuse she was getting, the taunting from the press corps, just some nasty things, and how it was him who took her aside and said, no, you're great and you need to, really kind of gave her the pep talk. And Lara Trump gave this very emotional story about watching Trump on TV during that assassination attempt and having to turn her kids' eyes away from the TV because she was so worried it would imprint in them a memory they would never move beyond. And I think those stories, but also coming from women, powerful women, by the way, too, who've been put in positions of power by Donald Trump, I think counts for something out there.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about some of the behind-the-scenes differences over J.D. Vance that we're picking up and what we can expect here the rest of the convention, and an interview that Donald Trump gave with Bloomberg that gives some indication of some of his new or old policy views when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on our daily Potomac Watch podcast for Wall Street Journal, and I'm here with Kim Strassel and Kyle Peterson. Kyle, let's talk about the kind of day after reception for J.D. Vance. In the hall, they love him. On the record, they love him. But behind the scenes, not everybody is fully thrilled.
Yeah, and I think it has to do with disagreements within the Republican Party and arguments about what Trumpism actually means and how it is supposed to carry forward over the next 4 years if the Trump administration comes back into power in Washington. And in the past, and in Trump's first term, there were internal fights within his administration about what Trumpism meant, how it was going to apply. Some of those fights, it seems like, were won day by day, hour by hour, which advisors he had spoken to. And I think that fight is getting more real now because there is a movement of some new republicanism, new nationalism that is trying to institutionalize its view of what good economic policy looks like within the Trump White House. And I'm not sure that Trump is on board with all of those ideas. He recently disavowed this Project 2025 that is being drawn up by the Heritage Foundation, this long 900-page document that is being presented as the Trump agenda for a second term. And the thing about Trump is that he is mercurial. He changes his mind. He has a few, I think, core instincts on tariffs and economic protectionism. But I think we're still going to have that fight in a second administration about what the actual policy on the ground is going to look like. And the thing about adding J.D. Vance to this mix is that really stacks the deck in favor of this kind of new nationalism.
Well, I think it's a double-edged concern. You mentioned the economic part, and I think that's absolutely right, particularly in the business community, which has been coming out more in support of Trump because of Joe Biden's failures and heavy regulation. In particular, his promise to raise taxes by $5 trillion, raise the corporate tax rate back up to 28%. You can go through a whole list of things that Biden has promised to do in a second term that the business community doesn't like. But there's this real concern about protectionism, tariffs, 10% tariff across the board on all imports, no matter what country they're from, Canada, Mexico, China, whatever. He put 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. And then there's the foreign policy part of it, particularly Ukraine, China, and the Middle East, Kim.
Yeah, to your point, Paul, most people are not going to go right now at this moment of time and really lay in to J.D. Vance. But I'll give you an example, though, of somebody who made an on-the-record comment that was just like, hey, whoa, John Thune, who right now is best positioned to potentially take over the Senate from Mitch McConnell later this year. He was on the record saying when he was asked, okay, well, now you have a new standard bearer for the party. This is going to be your guy in 2028, right? J.D. Vance. And he's like, well, let's not get ahead of our skis here. There's a lot of really capable people out there, which is sort of remarkable, right? Because often, people will see the way, but they're already getting ready to be set up for a fight next time around. And I think that's interesting and notable. Within the defense community, they are perhaps the most worried right now. And you see a couple of things happening. By the way, they're also worried about the immediate implications of this, meaning if Donald Trump were elected this fall and then, God forbid, anything were happen to him, they're worried about the potential that somebody as isolationist as J.D. Vance is suddenly commander in chief, and expect that to actually inspire some people to kind of think about some immediate policy changes, et cetera, about how they could handle that situation. There was one quote from an anonymous Republican saying, Ukraine had better hurry up and win fast. But then also the longer term implications to this too for policy down the road. And what you see people already doing behind the scenes, Paul, and I have talked to some of them, is they are redoubling their push to try to make their case for why to get some people in key positions in the administration, in particular cabinet positions, et cetera, that would be there as a real counterweight and to push back against that kind of J.D. Vance faction of the party and could be vice president.
Yeah, I talked to a Senate Republican who called me the day after the Vance pick and said that we're in a world of hurt here in terms of this is somebody who wants an active American role in the world and supports Ukraine and Israel, and said we are in a tough spot because it's going to be a daily battle for Trump's ear. And that person really wants these solid people you talked about in defense, in state, in the government, where they would be able to say, look, if you settle the Ukraine-Russia conflict, for example, by giving half of Ukraine to Russia, that's going to be something you're going to have to own, and you're going to have to live with the consequences. So this is a long way from being over in terms of the actual policies, but there's real concern, Kyle.
Yeah, and to go back to the economic policy for a minute and give a concrete example, Trump gave an interview recently to Bloomberg, and he's asked about the corporate tax rate, which he dropped to 21%, and he has said that he would like to take it to 20%. And he doubled down on that and said, I like simplicity. I like 20% better. And he said, I like 15% yet better, but I think that would be hard. And so Trump's instincts there are still that it is good for America. It is good for workers if business succeeds. And a way to do that is becoming more competitive, lowering the tax rate. I grant that he wants to add tariffs on top of that, which would undo a lot of the good effects there. But it is a contrast with J.D. Vance. As recently as a couple months ago, J.D. Vance was saying we don't need any more corporate tax cuts. We're in line with our competitors. And there's a faction on the right that says, why would we help these big corporations? We don't like big corporations anymore. We're a working man's party. And so that is the tension.